Alright, in this video, I'm going to assess whether or not every single MLB team season was a success or a failure. The season's not over yet, so I'll probably do a better video when I'm in New York if I have the time. Nonetheless, just wanted to sort of analyze it by team, which teams were successful, which teams were failures, and which teams are like more so in the space of it's hard to describe. We're going to be going, in order of the teams, and yeah, we'll just be doing that. We'll go through the divisions east to west, alphabetical order, so AL East, start, and finishing off with the NL West. Okay, so for the AL East, we're going to go, for all of these, we're going to go bottom up. Just because you're closer to the top does not mean your season was more of a success. I can think of many first place teams where their seasons wound up being a failure. Just so you know, I am in Wilmington filming this video. That's the Chase Center. I took a picture of it, but honestly, I have a picture of the skyline from like a mile and a half back. So I don't need to be doing this, but just enjoy the scenery of Wilmington as you go up, because I'm actually taking a walk to the zoo right now and just taking a bit of a break from the UD campus. Regardless, so in the bottom of the AL East, you had the Baltimore Orioles, and their season was absolutely a failure. 2022 and 2023, the Orioles really had their chance, couldn't secure Corbin Burns, but he wound up getting injured on the Diamondbacks anyway. But you just think that this is a team where in 2022, number one seed in the AL, 101 wins, couldn't win a single playoff game. 2023, top wild card spot, but they blow the AL East to the Yankees, wind up getting swept in a wild card round again. So no playoff wins, and they regressed by 10 wins. This year they had 75 wins, and they were just a really bad team all around. A lot of their core pieces regressed, and the Orioles, after 2023, 2024, looked like they had a bit of a window for success to capitalize on. They wound up blowing that window completely. Their window has slammed shut, and honestly, you gotta feel for the Orioles. Are they gonna go back to a half-decade period of irrelevancy at this point? Rays this season was also a failure. I get it, Hurricane Milton destroyed their stadium, but they were showing signs of life in the middle of the season and just completely folded at the end and wound up regressing on their 80-win total from 2024 by winning just 77 games. The Rays, however, were the team that sent the Mets into a downfall. We'll discuss that later. For the Boston Red Sox, I would say that this season was mildly successful. It wasn't a huge success, as the Red Sox lost in the wild card round to the Yankees. But nonetheless, they did make the playoffs for the first time in 4 years. Only 81 wins in a big late season collapse in 2024, 2025. They, start off really poorly, multiple games below 500, but they trade away Devers, have signs of life showing through the team, wind up finishing on 89 wins and getting into the playoffs. And honestly, to end a decently sized playoff drought, I would say that season on its own has to be mildly successful. Obviously, you got Crochet from the White Sox, so you kind of were going a bit all in because you had to briefly empty out the farm. And again, it's just unfortunate that the Red Sox season to end that way. It wasn't a big success, but I'd say ending any playoff drought is mildly successful as it is. So I'd say this season was a mild success. As for the New York Yankees, their season was a failure. They couldn't secure Juan Soto, but they instead built an arguably more well-rounded team by getting Max Fried, Cody Bellinger, Paul Goldschmidt. They essentially established a mini super team in a way. But Cole was out for the season with an injury, so Fried has become the ace, and he actually really did a very good job at it, minus one bad stretch. He was actually a very good pitcher for the Yankees, led the American League in terms of wins, winning 19 games in total. So that was a very good season for them in that regard. Here's the thing. They won 94 games. They matched their win total from last year. But this time the Toronto Blue Jays wound up finishing ahead of them. And while they won the wild card series against the Red Sox, they lost in the ALDS to the Blue Jays, so they regressed. But the regression wasn't totally their own fault. You know, they only missed out on the division but via head-to-head tiebreaker. Still though, you can tell that they just had the opportunity in 2024 and they blew it. So I would say the Yankee season was a failure, but more of a mild one as compared to, say, the Baltimore Orioles, where it was a huge failure. Blue Jays this season was obviously a major success. No one really thought they'd be in the World Series, and they are. Even if they lose, it's a failure. And they just took game one by a score of 11-4. So honestly, there's a non-zero chance that they win the whole damn thing. But the Blue Jays had 74 wins last year. They were just completely cooked. And they honestly, you know, paid Vlad the big money, $500 million, didn't let him walk. And that turned out to actually be a very good decision for them, as now they've been rewarded with their efforts by making it to a championship, winning the ALDS against the Yankees, and a very gruesome ALCS against the Seattle Mariners. The Blue Jays season was a success no matter what happens in the World Series. Unlike the other team, but we'll get to that at the end. As the NL East, the Washington Nationals season was a failure. They only had 71 wins in 2024 to match their 2023 total, but at least in that case, you could arguably say it was a success because a lot of their younger prospects are showing signs of life, while pieces like James Wood and CJ Abrams are continuing to grow and could potentially be stars. You have to also realize that, you know, we're getting to the point where, like, they just don't have any kind of pitching whatsoever, and their win total regressed down to the 60s. Like, they were in a position to, you know, potentially do something this year. They really blew it, and I don't know when they're going to be ready. The national season, to me, screams like a failure because you couldn't do it. The Nationals are also a weird team because they basically sold their souls for a championship by winning the World Series in 2019, won it, but have been basically irrelevant ever since, which is very interesting. You know, they've basically been like irrelevant ever since winning a championship in 2019, because they were relevant before then but kept choking in the playoffs. Finally, they get their title, and it's just like, okay. Speaking of championships, the Braves won a championship in 2021, so that might ease the pains of the season a little bit, but still, they've been on a downward decline ever since that 2021 championship. 2022 and 2023, over 100 wins and winning the NL East, just to lose in the NLDS to the Phillies. 2024, regress on that, get 89 wins, have to win to the last day of the season to make the playoffs, still make it, but just to lose in the wild card round in a sweep to the San Diego Padres. And finally, 2025, you get injured, horrible start, recover, but then just another collapse, finishing off 76 wins total. It was just pathetic showing by the Atlanta Braves, to be honest. And this might be the end of their window. I know they still think in 2026 that they can compete. I don't know if they'll be able to. The Marlins season was actually a mild success. They didn't spend a single dollar in free agency and still finished the season on 79 wins, improving on their 61 win total in 2024. If they actually spend and capitalize on some of the young pieces they have, the Marlins could be a playoff contender. There's a real chance the Marlins could win the NL East next year. Like, they actually had a chance to make the playoffs in the last week of the season. I know that they didn't, but they had a chance. They had a chance up until I think the game 159. A major step forward for the organization. The Mets, however, took many steps backwards. 2024 was arguably their first successful season since like 2015. I guess you could consider 2022 to be a success, but I wouldn't. You had arguably their most successful season since 2015 by making it to the NLCS on a miracle run. 2025, you start off 45-24, and then you go 38-55 the rest of the way, going on 3 separate losing streaks of 7 or more games to at first lose a chance of being a top seed in the NL, then lose a chance of the division, and eventually miss out on the playoffs altogether. Despite attaining, 96% odds at multiple points in the season to make the playoffs, the Mets couldn't do it and ultimately wound up missing out by 1 game on 83 wins. You had a $340 million payroll, just acquired Juan Soto. Honestly, this might be the biggest collapse in MLB history, considering all the circumstances, and with the Mets still committed to David Stearns and Carlos Mendoza, don't expect the Mets to compete at any point in 2026, especially with how financially irresponsible Steve Cohen is. The Mets window, I think, is slammed shut. It was very briefly open, and if there's any way for it to slam shut in a year, it did so in 2025. The Phillies season, however, was also a failure. You had 96 wins, which is basically the same as the 95 you had last year, and also like last year, lost the NLDS in 4 games, just to the Dodgers this time. And the Phillies kept making those small mistakes in critical games to ultimately cost themselves a series, though this time it was a lot of bad defense and bad base running that sealed the deal, not necessarily poor bullpen decisions like it was in the NLDS against the Mets in 2024. Either way, the Phillies made it to a World Series in 2022, lost in Game 7 of the NLCS in 2023, and since then just have not looked the same. They look like playoff chokers. At one point, they actually looked a bit like playoff risers, but no more. The Phillies window is slamming shut, and you gotta wonder how washed up Bryce Harper really is, and all that stuff. Like, it's tough for the Phillies. Okay, AL Central. The White Sox, this season was still a failure, but honestly, you gave up your best player, and you actually managed to get your win total into the 50s after it was a historically low 41 last year. That's got to count for something, if I'm being honest. That's got to count for something. Still, though, it was a failure. Royals, I'm not sure if they were 4th or 3rd, but after they made the playoffs, made the ALDS last year, they went right back to irrelevancy. Twins, you had that 2024 historical collapse, and they seem to have learned nothing from it, as their win total is also in the 70s. So, both their seasons were failures. Tigers and Guardians, meanwhile, is a very interesting thing. In short, the Guardians were 15.5 games back of the Tigers in July, and 10 games back in September. Playoff chances were very low, too, for the Guardians. They wound up coming back and winning the division. This set up the AL wildcard series between the Tigers and the Guardians. The Tigers won in 3 games. So the Tigers blew a huge division lead to the Guardians, but then wound up beating them in the playoffs. And the Guardians made the ALCS last year, too. I get that they gave up a lot of big pieces, and everyone really thought the Tigers were going to be the favorites, and they couldn't do it. Honestly, it's tough to analyze both seasons, whether or not they're successes or failures. Because you got to realize the Tigers lost the ALDS in a Game 5 15-inning heartbreaker with a RBI single from Jorge Polanco against the Mariners in the ALDS. So they basically got to the same point that they were at last year, too. They really didn't improve in any regards. It's just a very ugly circumstance. I'd say the Tigers still failed because they really had a chance to be one of the top seeds in the AL, wound up being a 6th seed and losing in the ALDS when this really was supposed to be their year. While the while the Guardians, I mean, based on this insane comeback, it was kind of a success, but didn't really mean anything in the end, so I don't know. As for the NL Central, Pirates this season just continue to be eternal failures. Cardinals, still a failure. The Reds are a weird case. They got 83 wins, they made the playoffs. Despite, only having a payroll around $110 million. That seems like a success, but again, only 83 wins. In 2023, they had 82 wins. I get that in 2024, they were in the 70s, but still. The only reason why the Reds made it was because the Mets collapse was so bad, and they were so pathetic, the Reds got in. This wasn't a case of other collapses where, one team collapses, but another team plays at a really good pace. Even the 2007 collapse, the reason why I always say 2025 collapse for the Mets was worse in 2007 is because in 2007, at least the Phillies had to win 80% of their remaining games to capitalize on the Mets being feeble losers. I mean, shame on the Mets for blowing a 7-game lead with 17 to play, but at least in that case, you have to tip your cap to an extent to the Phillies for making them pay. When the Mets went 38-55, the Reds, who are 10 games back of them, just went 48-45, and they still made the playoffs. It wasn't even they made a big comeback or anything like that. They just got lucky. In mid-September, they still lost a series to the Athletics. It's honestly ridiculous the Reds made the playoffs. And they wound up not winning a single playoff game as they got swept by the Dodgers in the wild card series. I'm not going to say it's a failure, but it's not really a success either, because it's highly doubtful that they'll be back in the playoffs in 2026. They got to get a lot better. And a lot better. Cubs, they won the wild card against the Padres, but then lost it against the NLDS against the Brewers in 5 games. And it's weird because they blew a 6.5 game lead in Division 2. Many thought the Cubs would finally win the division, but the Milwaukee Brewers did it back-to-back. And everyone thought the Cubs would win the division in 2024 as well. They wound up missing the playoffs while the Brewers, cruised to an easy division title. This time, you got to give the Cubs credit. They ended their 5-year playoff drought, which was actually 7 years. It was actually 7 years in full seasons because 2020 was only a partial season. But they still lost the NLDS. I don't know. This season was a bit of both for the Cubs, but it was still a mild success. If nothing else, you at least know PCA can play defense, even if he's very inconsistent at offense. You at least know that PCA can play very good platinum level defense, and that's honestly the most important thing. Brewers, you had 97 wins, and you got the NL1 seed, won a playoff series, the NLDS against the Cubs, just to lose the NLCS in a sweep to the Dodgers where you batted 118. I can't in good faith say that it's a failure, but it's not really a success either. They still haven't shown that they can compete in the playoffs. I mean, I guess it's a little bit of a success because they at least beat the Cubs in the NLDS, but they just got flat out embarrassed by the Dodgers. As for the West, in the AL West, the A's will continue to be a failure for God knows how long. Same for the Angels. More misery in those two teams. Rangers, yeah, I'd say it's a failure. You had DeGrom back from injury, just do nothing with around 500, around a 500 ball club. The Astros, they were 20 over 500, finished only 87-75, missed the playoffs in another big late season collapse to really slam their window shut. I get that they had 2 World Series championships in their window. Their window, which everyone thought might be closing in 2023, was really affirmed in 2024. It's definitely slammed shut. I get that they had a historic amount of injuries, but they're just done. They just really can't compete anymore. But the Mariners, a lot of people thought the Mariners were going to make the World Series, and they couldn't. They had the best season in franchise history, but they choked a 2-0 lead in the ALCS, including a 3-1 lead in Game 7 after 6. The Mariners, this really was their chance to make it to the World Series, and they couldn't. not exactly a big success, in my opinion, at least. As for the NL West, the Rockies were a huge failure. I mean, their win total was in the 40s, so that's pathetic. Diamondbacks, 80 wins. I get that they had a lot of injuries and they had to trade away a lot of their star players deadline. Honestly, impressive. They still almost made the playoffs, but it's a bit of a failure. 84 wins and they made the 2023 World Series. 2024, they couldn't make the playoffs in 89 wins. And now 2025, they're just kind of back to where they were the whole time. Just not a very great team. Giants, 81 wins. But again, they were in position to potentially win the NL West in mid-June. Got Devers and still collapsed like they always do. Padres, just, I would say it's a failure at this point. You lost in the wild card round, and all you can have is like mini playoff runs. And as for the final team on this list, the Dodgers, it's still to be determined because honestly, they don't win the World Series. The season is a bit of a failure with how much money they've spent and how many good players they have.